Welcome to Valuification of Things, your one-stop podcast on the discussion of value, and especially business value. This is a forum where your host, Sri Sundaram, will be discussing topics on how to quantify value for practically any scenario. Along the way, we will have business leaders and subject matter experts describing their value journey. So sit back, relax, and enjoy this podcast episode.
Hello there. I'm Sri Sundaram, your host. Today, we talk about the power of visual storytelling, how successful visual storytelling has led to some greater successes in business campaigns. In today's discussion, we dive into what visual storytelling is all about and the different visual media used to tell these stories. We explore the key business benefits that make visual storytelling effective in business campaigns. We also look at a few successful visual story campaigns that have resonated with the audience over time. I'm sure telling stories is not easy, especially visually. So we look at challenges in this area and some best practices that need to be followed. Finally, we look at the impact of generative AI in developing visual stories. Does it help or hurt? So let me introduce our guest today. Kevin Brown is a master storyteller and a creative director with over 30 years of experience. He has worked in the video game industry for companies such as EA Sports, Sony PlayStation, and Microsoft Game Studio. Kevin, I'm impressed with your tremendous experience in creative content development, and I'm all agog to hear your perspectives today. Welcome to the Valuification of Things.
Hi, Sri. Thanks for having me. Really excited to be here today.
So before we begin, let us delve into what visual storytelling is and the kinds of visual story techniques typically used. Kevin, so what is visual storytelling and how is it used in business presentations?
Well, visual storytelling is essentially the art of using images to tell stories. Visual storytelling can be used and leveraged to tell a wide range of stories, sometimes very simple stories, but also some can be very, very complex.
So thank you for that definition, Kevin. What are some techniques typically used to narrate stories visually?
Oh, great question. Some of the techniques that I've used and seen leveraged, it's using photography to tell stories. Photography is a great way to sort of bring in realism and really bring an emotional tenet to your story. Other techniques are using illustrations and really bringing in a sort of mood with leveraging color and various different techniques there. Of course, using video, live action can really leverage the story because now you can actually act out a scenario and really bring in dialogue for a particular persona or character. And then lastly, leveraging animation. Animation is a great way to bring in motion and bring attention to various different benefits of your solution to the audience who might not get that visual cue.
So you've been a master storyteller for a while, Kevin. Which one do you prefer?
Well, I prefer all, to be quite honest with you, Sri. All can be leveraged, and it's really about understanding what story you're trying to tell, how best the audience would receive that story, and most importantly, what would leverage and continue that emotional tenet throughout the story so that it ultimately resonates with your audience.
So thank you for that, Kevin. So when you look at visual storytelling, especially in the context of business, it's a powerful tool, and as you mentioned already, what are some benefits? Why does it make such a compelling proposition to get into visual storytelling as opposed to the traditional ways of doing it? What are those benefits that you have encountered?
Yeah, well, those benefits are vast, but some that come to mind are you can increase your audience's engagement, right? The more the audience understands the story and relates to it, you're going to increase that engagement. accelerates the understanding by using storytelling techniques. It accelerates the understanding of sometimes very complex scenarios, but understanding is really the key. You can also build in strong emotional connections where you will actually relate, or as they say, empathize with a particular persona in the story. And once you have empathized or put yourself in the shoes of that character, you really can see the benefits from your own perspective. And then lastly, you can increase, of course, brand awareness. You can have that tailored to the sales and marketing of your product. And so when you can see a consistent storyline through the branding all the way through the products and sales, it really provides a cohesive message that really lands with the audience and most importantly, with customers.
Now, I'm sure in your long career, you've seen fantastic visual story campaigns that have resulted in some great successes in the business world. Can you name a few that have particularly stood out for you that you say, these are the ones that people should think about and when they talk about visual storytelling?
Yeah, that's a really great question. Interestingly enough, one that comes to mind is one that most folks should relate to and understand. And it was a Super Bowl campaign by Budweiser, and it was called Puppy Love. And essentially, it was the sort of relationship between a puppy, a little puppy, and one of the Budweiser's Clydesdales. And it was amazing how that story really resonated with the audience. They could see how the importance of friendships, and most importantly, Budweiser was able to leverage their brand throughout the story. So at the end of the commercial, and I do remember this during the Super Bowl, their sales from simply that ad campaign and the timing of the Super Bowl increased Budweiser's sales by 5%. Based on that campaign, and they were able to use that data to continue that storytelling through the eyes of the Clydesdales. So really amazing work there.
Oh, that is indeed compelling, Kevin. Any other examples? I'm sure there's some examples from your own past.
Yeah, one comes to mind. This was, a few years ago when I worked at EA Sports as the art director for the Tiger Woods franchise. And as most of you know, working on a sports title in a sports franchise, you deliver the title year to year at the exact same date. It's a huge amount of customers and fans that are waiting for that game every single year. How do you increase a franchise that leverages the entire team focused on one game, but how do you build out a sort of franchise approach? And one of the things that I did along with my team is created this character called Cyber Tiger. And we leveraged Tiger Woods, his background and his childhood prodigy as a golfer. And you leveraged his storyline of becoming a pro. And we built a story around it where Tiger and his friends progressed through their lives, but also progressed through the game and ultimately becoming Cyber Tiger, which took sort of the sports franchise into a platformer type of game, which ultimately really ended up being very successful for not only EA Sports, but sports franchises and the opportunity to go into platform type of games and activities subsequently, really sort of evolved from that point. And I was really proud to help develop the story and the concept around Cyber Tiger along with Tiger Woods at the time.
So isn't that paradigm used today in a lot of these Madden football games and basketball games, video games? Don't they use the same concept today?
Yes, they do. And prior to games being more simulation based, sports video games have evolved to being a little bit more entertainment based, right? Where it's fun. The strategy and the simulation components are still there. But in a video game context, you're looking for a little extra, and that allowed for those sports franchises to sort of branch into new areas. And ultimately, EA Sports Big was developed essentially around the notion of taking sports franchises and evolving them into this new frontier of platformer-based game experiences based on those franchises. So really, really excited, and it's sort of rewarding to see that genre really take.
So thank you for those compelling examples. So when we come back, we'll continue our conversation with Kevin, where we'll get into the challenges, the best practices, and more importantly, the impact of Gen AI on all of this.
This episode of Valuification of Things is sponsored by Valuify. Valuify is a free tool that allows you to create business value models. Go to valuify.net and click download to begin your valuification journey.
Welcome back. Today we have Kevin Brown, accomplished creative director and seasoned visual storyteller, talking about the power of effective stories in business presentations. He provided key value levers that make storytelling a compelling proposition in business enterprises. And he also provided examples of the Puppy Love Budweiser commercial, and he also gave an example from his own past about Cyber Tiger and his influence in that campaign. Now, before we get into challenges and downsides of using storytelling, let me circle back a little bit, Kevin, and ask about what are the key ingredients in a successful story?
So Sri, the key ingredients in a successful story are very simple. The number one is who and what is the story about, right? And then having a list of characters. Some can be main characters, supporting characters, or even an environment can be the character. And then lastly, your message is centered around what we call a universal truth, right? A conclusion that lands a universal truth. Having those components or ingredients are really key to telling a compelling story campaign.
So in your mind, Kevin, what is a good story and what is not a good story? How would you compare and contrast the two?
Great question, because I love to start off with what's not good storytelling. And what's not good storytelling is personal opinions, assertions, facts, data, ideas or arguments, ads or marketing, exploitation, of course, and posting content in social channels and just calling it a story. But what is storytelling is the emotional transfer of information through the introduction of a character, a plot, and a conclusion. If it doesn't have those components, it's not storytelling.
So thank you for that distinction, Kevin. I think I learned a lot between what is a good story and what is not a good story. And I'll try to keep that in mind in my presentations, because I think what you just said applies even when it's not visual, right? Having that first, second, and third parts. Yes. So I'm sure, Kevin, in your line of trade, you see all kinds of challenges, in developing these visual stories. It's not easy to keep an audience engaged, right? Some of the executives, they are quite busy, and it's very hard to get their complete and full attention. So as you develop the stories and as you develop your craft, what are some challenges that you see?
Yeah, well, the number one is simply using the right visual. That's really important. With generative AI, a lot of times you can have assistance, but you really need to make sure it's the right visual. Having a clear storyline, right? Having that plot be understood, having the conclusion be refined is really important to having a clear storyline. And connecting with the audience, again, pulling that emotional tenet through so that there is a connection with your audience. And most importantly, keeping your audience continuously engaged, meaning when you are telling a story, refer to things that the audience can remember, to keeping that emotion at its heightened element while you're telling that story. These are some challenges that I've faced, and some that possibly should be avoided if possible.
Have you encountered a situation where you thought it was a great story, but it landed elsewhere, it went south, and it completely disrupted the presentation? Do you have any examples of those kinds of things?
Well, yeah, none that I like to really bring up, but since you ask, I think I will. And it goes back to using sort of the right visual. You can tell a compelling story, right? You write a narrative, you have all of the components of great storytelling, and now you need to add in the picture that is worth 1,000 words. It's very tempting sometimes to just go and do a quick search for an image that you think you have in your mind. But if it's not the right image, it can really be confusing. And if the viewer is confused, your story does not land. They're trying to reconcile in their head those disconnects. And until they do, you've lost their attention.
So given those challenges, Kevin, what are some best practices that you would advocate?
Well, yes, starting with a really strong story, as I described earlier, the narrative, that's really key. But using compelling images and visuals. And when I mean compelling, find something emotional that you want to communicate through those visuals. Test your story. Don't just keep the story sort of to yourself, until you've gotten it to a certain state. Test it, share it. Does it make sense? Are you still relating to the main character or the persona? And then lastly, be patient. Just be patient. Rome was not built in a day. Great stories are not discovered in a day. So be patient with yourself. Continue to refine it. Iteration is key. But most importantly, be patient.
How do you test a story? What is the techniques that you use to test stories? Do you ask your friends and family to listen to your story or something else?
Yeah, so yes and yes. I will employ friends and family, but also a technique is to sort of read it or try to mimic it in character, right? So it really can come to life if you can sort of, put that persona in character, tell the story through that character, and if it still lands, if it still makes sense, then you can continue building on it. But if there's a disconnect, you might want to start over again because paper's, really, really cheap. You can start over again, but you want to test it to make sure that you're not spending too much time in something that just doesn't have a good storyline and a follow through for your character.
So those are indeed a good set of best practices, Kevin. As we wrap up our episode, I do want to ask you one last question that's been plaguing me for a while now. The concept of generative AI that's taken over the business world since end of last year. How does it affect what you're doing? How does it affect visual storytelling?
It definitely has a dramatic impact on visual storytelling. Personally, I really like generative AI and some of the tools that are emerging on the market. One of the things that I've leveraged generative AI is to quickly tell a story. I can put in a few elements of a story with a character, and I can quickly get a first pass draft of a story, which allows for me to really sort of to edit the story and to refine the story, as opposed to just building out the story and then working on it from that. So it does add a little time savings in terms of building up a story in the foundation. However, I personally have learned that it can't just be taken verbatim. It has to be sort of matured or modeled or refined from a personal standpoint to really get the true power of storytelling through it. I've also used image creation tools, some that are in Adobe Suite, as you can imagine, and other platforms like bedtimestory.ai is a really great one. It allows you to tell stories and write a narrative, but it also can recommend images so that you can build out a storyboard. But once again, you can't use them as verbatim. You can refine them. You might want to try a few other images to sort of make sure it's telling the story correctly, but it certainly does save a lot of time. And most importantly, it allows you to refine stories versus spending a lot, time building out the story.
So what you're telling me, Kevin, is you can use Gen AI as a supplement to your skill, but it's not going to replace your skill.
No, at this juncture, now, I can't predict the future, but currently the human aspect is still required to make sure that the story lands, right? I mean, you can spend a lot of time, hit the button, and you get a great story, so it seems. But if it doesn't land, again, with the audience, it's a waste. Things that you can think about that allow Gen AI to really help and aid in your workflow is that it can create more realistic images. So you could go from sort of a square and a circle and a couple of lines in a storyboard to be a human. You can actually have a little bit more of a refined human. It also can allow you to personalize those visual stories. You can actually bring in the same character, have them doing a wide range of different things to personalize it. You can also generate, additional new stories out of an existing story. And then lastly, it just accelerates creativity. And at the end of the day, that's what it's all about. Positioning yourself to sort of, leverage that right brain, continue to refine the storytelling techniques. But what Gen AI does currently is really accelerate that creativity, of which I really, really appreciate.
Thank you for those insightful perspectives, Kevin. Thank you for being a guest on today's topic of visual storytelling for effective business presentations. Appreciate you being on this episode of the Valuification of Things.
Thank you, Sri. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for watching this episode. Today we had Kevin Brown, seasoned creative director and master storyteller, talking to us about the power of using visual storytelling to drive effective business presentations. He talked about the business benefits of using this technique. It also provided some successful examples of visual storytelling campaigns. We talked about challenges, best practices, and the impact of Gen AI in developing visual stories. In future episodes, we will continue to dwell on the valuification of things with other thought leaders and industry executives. Stay tuned.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Valuification of Things. I hope you enjoyed it and learned something new. If you did, please share this episode with your friends and family, and don't forget to leave a review. We're always looking for ways to improve and bring in the best content possible. If you want to be featured on this podcast, please drop us a line at podcast@valuification.com.